What's up, everybody? It's Disthunder, and we've got a big one today. We're going to talk about the Mezco Toys 112 Collective Destro, the first G.I. Joe in the entire line. It goes without saying, me and plenty of other folks were very excited about this and what this means for the future of 112 Collective going forward. So I'm pretty excited to talk about it, and I'm probably going to talk a lot. So grab yourself a drink, get comfortable, and let's get into it. There's always a little bit of contention when you select a character to be the newest part of like a subline or a new line altogether, and I'm sure people feel that way about Destro, but I don't in the slightest. I think he's an excellent candidate for the beginning of any toy line, and hell, I'll give you several reasons why. As most of you know, Destro makes his appearance in 1983, which is the second year of the Real American Hero franchise, and kind of a watershed moment in G.I. Joe history. He is on the first episode of the Mass Device miniseries, which is the Cobra Strikes. I believe that was September of '83. He is in issue 11 of the comic book, so he just narrowly makes it into the first year of that comics run. But most importantly, he is I believe, one of only 4 new Cobra characters in year 2 of the toy line. And like I said, year 2 in the toy line especially is a very watershed moment in the Real American Hero franchise, because that's really when you start getting into the vehicles, and the character selection kind of starts to skew away just a little bit from the olive drabs and the dress blues to guys like Major Blood and Destro. And as such, I feel pretty confident in saying I bet Destro was a pretty hot draw to the toy aisles back in the fall of '83. As is customary, we should talk about articulation, because that's what toy reviews are all about. Destro feels like he's on a new body, kind of a superhero-ish body. You'll find he has a little bit of butterfly range in the shoulder joint, double-jointed elbows, and a double-jointed torso. It's possible we've seen this body on another character before, but I don't know that I recognize it. In any case, the suit is very superhero-like, so that means it gets out of the way and lets you articulate pretty well. There is a double joint in the torso, and that hard collar and chest piece don't really get in the way of it at all. He has a ball-jointed neck at the collar and in the top of the neck. They don't get a ton of range, but between that and the torso joints, you can get him to look up or crouch down pretty well. The simplicity of the design helps out quite a bit in leg range. You see we have a decent range out and past 90 degrees forward. There is a double-jointed knee that only bottoms out when the boot starts to touch the inside of the thigh just a little bit, but you can obviously get a little better than I did there. He has really nicely new sculpted and articulated boots with a good range on the ankles. And then, of course, ball-jointed wrists for the swappable hands. As far as costume features, you already noticed the giant medallion around his neck that is removable. He has a thigh drop holster that is interchangeable with a secondary holster for a different sidearm. I'll get into that in a few. His right gauntlet has his wrist rockets on it, which have an effect piece that plugs in, that again I will show a little bit later. And the left arm has like a flip-up communicator readout with a little display and a little bit of a keypad that are sculpted into the relief. You guys know how much I love little touches like that. Really, overall, his costume is very faithful to the Real Action Hero design, just with a little bit of Mezco vinyl and some texture applied here and there. Speaking of things I love, let's talk about his weapons, and let's start with his sidearm. This pistol is kind of unique. It has a magwell in front of the trigger group, which is not completely out of the ordinary, just a little uncommon these days. That magazine is removable, and it does fit very nicely in this little holster here. It's kind of reminiscent of his original sidearm from the original toy. Likewise, his wrist gauntlet here does what we all wish the original could do, which is make it look like it's actually shooting rockets. It just pegs into a little square peg that goes onto the top of the wrist, as you can see there, and just line up and snap in. The more astute of you Joe fans already noticed that communicator took the place of the grenades he generally carries on his left gauntlet, and you know what? I'm glad they got rid of that. Your forearm is a stupid place to carry grenades. Next up is the battle rifle, and this isn't going to surprise anybody. This is probably my favorite of the group. The receiver has kind of an AR-15 lower quality to it, and the magwell has that build-up kind of like an M4 pulse rifle, which is two things I really like. Speaking of the magwell, the magazine comes out, but you've got to get your fingernail in there to make it work, and I was having a hell of a time first try. You can see there are sculpted bullets in it, which means it's not a ray gun, but I'll tell you what, if you want to pretend it's a ray gun, that's cool with me. And lastly, in a nice nod to his original gun and the briefcase that came with it, you have this modular submachine gun that has actually 2 different magazines. I've got the long one in it because it's easier to see. Has a removable stock, removable scope, foregrip, and suppressor. Has a very modular, customizable feel to it. Like you can rotate that foregrip so you can have it either parallel with the trigger group, or you can move it off to the side for like a 90-degree offhand grip. And where I mentioned that his first pistol is very reminiscent of his original sidearm from the 83 toy, this one can really be pretty much a one-to-one. You just pull off some of the accessories here, like take off the foregrip and the suppressor, switch it for the smaller magazine. Actually, the scope can stay. I started taking it off, but remembered it will actually fit in the secondary holster, like so. There are 2 pegs in the back of that holster. You just peg it into that thigh drop, and you have him basically running his 83 loadout. Should you decide to stow it, though, it all fits neatly in this little molded casing that fits inside of his briefcase. This makes for a pretty cool presentation, like he's showing off his wares to a potential buyer inside the briefcase. But if you have other Mezco briefcases, you probably already guessed there is a secondary option. And like a lot of those, if you push the lower button here on the left-hand side, you arm, no doubt, some form of insidious biochemical weapon that can also be stored safely in that briefcase. And consequently, my only complaint now is I kind of need a second briefcase. Let's talk about head sculpts here, because while I love this one, he also comes with this absolutely gorgeous Ron Rudat-inspired box art style head sculpt, which obviously feels more mask-like. And this is the pure choice if somebody wants a more regular 83 Destro look. But if you want to have some fun with it, this secondary grinning head turned out to be a whole hell of a lot more fun than I was expecting it to. I think they dialed it back a little bit from when we first saw it, but I think it's perfect that I can't imagine not using something like this when the opportunity arises. Let's discuss some size comparisons, as is probably a good idea where this line's concerned, because I was a little bit surprised at how complementary this feels, not just in style, but in size, to the G.I. Joe Classified series. Obviously, there's a major tactile difference between the two here, but I think it actually scales pretty well, and I think you'd get away with it if you wanted to. But for posterity's sake, here is a 112 Supreme Knight Batman with an Arkham head. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't think he has a superhero body, at least not that superhero body. But there's no denying this Destro is absolutely jacked, and it feels similar in size and scale. Sort of comes across as a nice bridge between the superhero stuff and the soldier stuff. So in getting Destro and adding him to the 112 Collective, this is just another crazy high on what's been a ridiculous ride the last couple of years as a G.I. Joe fan. There are so many things that are coming out that I wouldn't even thought possible remotely if we were to ask me, 5-6 years ago. And obviously it's particularly poignant for me because 112 Collective is my favorite toy line, and now one of the most important toy lines of my youth is becoming part of that. And when I say that about it being an important toy line, it's not just because it was something I enjoyed as a kid, like a lot of you watching, I'm sure. It's part of what formed my fundamentals as an adult. Might sound silly to some people, but G.I. Joe was one of the reasons I wanted to put on the uniform, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that regard. But beyond that stuff, the heavy stuff, there's also kind of a personal righting of a wrong, I guess you could say, because I think back to about 10-12 years ago when the Sideshow 1/6 scale figures came out, and I wasn't in a position financially to do that line, no matter how much I wanted to. And I had to look on with definite pangs of regret, and I've spent time and years since as things have improved, wondering if I should go back and try to grab those. Well, now I don't feel like I have to. In a lot of ways, that was kind of the mission statement of 112 Collective, unofficially as it might be, but the idea was that we were going to get Hot Toys Sideshow style figures in a more affordable style and scale, right? That was the idea. And that's not to say they haven't delivered before now, God, far from it, but this particular figure, the presentation, the box art being the 83 box art, just the whole thing, this feels like one of the most important figures Mezco's ever done, and easily one of the best, and that's no hyperbole. So it is with immense gratitude I thank Mezco Toys for getting this figure to me and for making it in the first place, and I can't wait to see where we go from here. And equally sincerely, I hope you guys will join me as we see what 112 and G.I. Joe can do for us next. Take care. We'll talk again soon.